going to be talking about phrases. Phrases are a group of words that act like one part of speech. The difference between phrases and clauses are that phrases do not have a subject or a verb. There's several different types of phrases. Some we're going to cover today are noun phrases, verb phrases, prepositional phrases, verbal phrases, and absolute phrase. So a phrase, basically, since it acts like a different part of speech, a noun phrase acts like a noun. So in the sentence, delicious gooey peanut butter is surprisingly healthful, the noun phrase is delicious gooey peanut butter because it's the subject of the sentence. Okay, you can replace that subject with spaghetti, which is one word, noun. So spaghetti is surprisingly healthful. Each of these examples are correct because they're acting like the other. In a verb phrase, it's exactly like the noun phrase. You are going to use it to replace the verb, using all of the helping verbs and the auxiliary verbs to make up the verb phrase. So in an example, I can swim for a long time. Can swim is the verb phrase. In the second example, his headaches might have been caused by tension. So the verb phrase would be might have been caused. And the reason that that's pretty long is because might have been is the auxiliary verbs and the main verb is caused. So together that makes the verb phrase.
What we're going to talk about now is positive phrases. A positive phrase is a noun or pronoun with modifiers. It's placed next to a noun or pronoun, adds information or details to it. Our example would be, I met with John English, comma, publisher of the local newspaper. Your positive phrase is publisher of the local newspaper because it renames or gives details to the noun John English. The next phrase we're going to talk about today will be prepositional phrases. Starts with a preposition. It may have modifiers or other words, but it always ends with the object of the preposition. So object of the preposition, the OP, has to be a noun or a pronoun, okay? So we have examples. The toy is on the table. Your preposition is on and your object of your preposition is table. The entire thing is your prepositional phrase. Example, the man drove around the parking lot. Around is your preposition. Lot is going to be the object of your preposition, and together it makes the prepositional phrase.
Our next phrase type is a verbal phrase. Now, don't confuse those with verb phrases, which actually use the verbs and the auxiliary verbs to make the phrase. A verbal phrase is sort of verb-like. What it does, a verbal phrase will use a verb as another part of speech. So it's any verb form that is used in a sentence not as a verb, but as another part of speech. You can use a verb as lots of different things. If you use a verb as a noun, we call that a gerund phrase. An example of that would be, hiking is a great idea. Now, in another sentence, hiking might be the verb of the sentence, but in this case, it's the subject. We're using it as a noun because it's a thing. Hiking is a great idea. If we use a verb as an adjective, we call that a participial phrase. So, they went on a walking tour. Walking is describing the tour, telling you what kind of tour it was. Whereas in another sentence, I went walking or something like that. Walking would be the verb, but in this case, it's an adjective describing the tour. Now, an infinitive phrase is one that could be a little bit confusing because an infinitive phrase uses the word to, but it's not a preposition. We talked earlier about prepositions, and we know that to is one of the prepositions, like I'm going to the library. That's a destination. So in that case, the word to is the preposition, and the prepositional phrase is to the library. But in this case, when we use an infinitive phrase, there's no destination. So an example would be something like this. I am going to swim after school. Now, there's no destination here. It's just saying what I'm going to do. I'm going to swim after school. So in this case, it's not a preposition. Even though you see the word to, you think, preposition. It's actually an infinitive phrase there. And our last phrase type is an absolute phrase. And an absolute phrase is a really good example to add richness and detail and complexity to your writing. What it does is it adds information to the entire sentence. It's not just being one thing, but it's adding information to the sentence as a whole. And this is where we can get some really awesome writing. So if I just had the sentence, I stood on the deck, I could put a period right there and that could be it. And that's just a basic, simple sentence. But when I add this absolute phrase, the wind whipping my hair, it just adds more information about the sentence. It paints a much more detailed picture about what you're wanting to say. So that's an example of the absolute phrase at the end of the sentence. Here I put the absolute phrase at the beginning of the sentence. My fears laid to rest, I climbed into the plane for my first solo flight. Now I could have taken that out and just said, I climbed into the plane for my first solo flight. And that would be a complete thought. But when I add this absolute phrase, my fears lay to rest, it gives you more information about me, my mentality before I climbed into the plane, and it just makes the writing that much more rich and complicated.